Hi, everyone. My name is Haley. I'm here from ProWritingAid, and with me today is AJ Ogilvie. AJ is a professor of business communication at the University of Southern California and here at ProWritingAid. He's taught business communication, consulting, and writing courses for over 10 years and has published research on the theories of teaching, learning, and communication. So I'm going to turn it over to him. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A at the bottom, and we will get to them at the end.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. Yeah, so my name's AJ, and as Haley said, basically the first decade of my corporate career, I was a writer. I wrote in marketing and sales and communication, and then the second decade of my career, I've studied writing and taught writing. And so today's webinar, we're really going to try to make it as interactive as possible, and we're going to have a session towards the end where we can have a Q&A, and I'd love to hear from as many people as possible, not only with your questions, but maybe with some of your own insights as well. So today's webinar is about 5 simple steps writing an effective cold sales email. Okay, so what are our goals for today? The first goal is I'd like to add helpful tools to your existing writing toolbox. And what I mean by that is that all of us, I'm assuming all of you are bringing significant writing experience, even if you're only writing, even if you've only been in the business world, or you're writing a novel or whatever it may be, even if you feel like you don't, you likely do have more writing experience than you know. And so today's webinar is not about replacing your ideas or dumping knowledge at you, but instead is just building upon your existing writing toolbox and adding some new tools that are hopefully really helpful. So ideally, you'll build upon your existing writing toolbox. You'll absorb the ideas from today. The other thing too is that not all of them might work for you, and that's totally fine. So I really encourage you to adapt them and say, you know what, that one doesn't make sense for me, but this one does. And the other idea too is that, and there are many different theories of how to write well, but also specifically how to write an effective cold sales email. And so you might disagree with some of my ideas, and that is fine too. And I'm up for learning about your own approach, things that have worked for you. So the second goal is that I just want you to leave being able to write sales emails more efficiently and effectively. And by efficiently, what I mean is I think writing cold sales email is difficult. And so to write one more efficiently would maybe make the process a little bit more, a little bit more enjoyable, a little more effective, that you can get more of them out in a day, but also that the more you send out, the more likely you are for them to work, you get people to respond to you. But additionally, I think some of the principles here, I think can help increase your effectiveness as a writer and your confidence as a writer across all types of writing. So I want to start off with a little interactive, a little interaction. This is an actual cold sales email that I've received recently. I've changed some of the identifying information just because I don't want to pick on anybody, but I think it's relatively representative of a lot of the B2C cold sales emails that I get, and maybe that you're finding the same thing. So what I'd like you to do is to read it, and then I'd like you in the chat to give this a score. And the score that I'd like you to give it is based off of what I call it's a likely to respond score on a scale of 1 to 5. And so I'd like you to imagine that this person, Adam, you work with Adam, and they have said, hey, would you read this cold sales email that I'm sending to AJ or Andrew, and tell me, do you think this is going to work? And so I want you, again, to kind of imagine that you're sort of giving feedback to Adam and saying, yeah, I think AJ is or is not likely to respond given on what you've written here. So take maybe a couple minutes to read it, and then would you in the chat write how likely you think I am to respond to this, and then we'll go from there, and then we'll start from there. So. Great, we've got some scores coming in already. some interesting. George, that's an interesting response. Greg Parsons gives it a 4. Okay. Yeah, this is really interesting feedback from everybody. Yeah, this idea that it's too long. Okay, we'll wait for a few more to trickle in. So if you could, in the chat, if you could try to send it to all panelists. Okay. Okay, cool. So the score that I would give it is a 0, right? That I'm not, I didn't even read it. And I think a lot of you, I like how you have brought up some ideas about why that is. And maybe if you don't mind, would you just put in the chat now, would you put in like 1 or 2 reasons, short reasons for that explains the score that you gave? So I just want us thinking about what it is, what is it about this cold sales email that we don't like? So if you could just put in the chat, some of you have already done it if you have, but maybe just a few more people say, what is it? What is the problem? Or if if you gave it a low score, just a couple things that explain why you did that. Too long. Great. This is great feedback and good analysis. By the end of today's webinar, what I hope you all will be able to do is, you have some really good insights now, is you'll have even more specific tools to diagnose this, right? So using the 5 steps, you can say, you'll be quickly go, oh, I know really specifically and maybe perhaps more acutely exactly what why this cold sales email is not working for me specifically. So, okay, so why? I'd argue that the idea is that the sales emails are really about personal connection. And we have data that proves this. So personalized emails have a 17% reply rate compared to 7% for personalized emails. Personalized emails deliver 6 times higher 6 times higher transaction rates. Another thing about, and we'll talk more about this later, is that emails with humor received a 56% open rate, which is a really high rate, which is interesting. But I'd argue that the humor is because it feels personal, right? It feels sort of warm. And an optimal length is less than 200 words. And this email is well over 200 words. And so I think all of your insights are really sharp. So what does this mean? In my view, it means you have to personalize. You must personalize a cold sales email. And I'd almost argue, if you're not going to personalize it, I wouldn't write it at all. That's my own view. A key thing, though, is that as you start to think about how you're going to personalize cold sales emails, or even just networking emails to people you don't know, you're really going to have to find your own style on like a spectrum, right? So, and this should really fit who you are as a person. I'd argue that the email that you send should have a consistency with the ways that if the person you sent that email to met you, if you met them, there'd be a sort of like a brand, a feel, a consistent, a coherent feel from the email to the personal interaction to the phone call, right? Across all of these mediums. So you have to figure out, do you have a more formal style, or are you a bit more informal? Are you somewhere in the middle on the spectrum of that? Are you kind of cheesy? And this might be admittedly an American term, but cheesy might be dad jokes, or just kind of cheesy at its worst is inauthentic. It feels someone's like just not being real with us. But at its best, it's just silly and fun, and it kind of, makes someone, you can find someone endearing because they have like a cheesy dad joke or something. And then also, similarly, do you want to be funny or serious or somewhere in between, like a lighthearted joke maybe. So all of you and all of us have to figure out what our own style is on a spectrum. In today's webinar, I can introduce you some ideas, but you yourself will have to, do trial and error and figure that out. So what is the first step? The first step is you must understand your client. And we know that empathy is everything. Empathy is a massive word today in 2020. Everybody's talking about it. It always has been, but if you read Harvard Business Review or read Forbes or read Inc. or you read anything, any books that people are talking about, it's empathy. And I think overall this is a great thing. So Daniel Pink, a best-selling author, wrote a really fascinating book called To Sell is to Be Human. And he says this: the ability to move people now depends on powers inverse. That is, it's not about you, but about understanding another person's perspective, getting inside their head and seeing the world through their eyes. But it's not only good advice, it's data backed. We know that empathy gets results. So there's a famous Harvard Business Review study of sales associates from 2011, and they looked at 6,000 sales reps across 100 organizations, and they reduced all those sales reps to five profiles. And they said, basically, there are five profiles. And the most successful one is what they called the challenger. And the challenger of all of the profiles dramatically outperformed the other types. Why? Because they tailored their sales message to the customer. Well, let's get more specific. They have a finely tuned sense of individual customer objectives and value drivers. So what does this mean to understand your client? You're going to need to build a mini file on them. And I think you could take 20 to 30 minutes to do this. You want to look everywhere. You want to make an exhaustive search. You want to look at their LinkedIn. You want to look at their company bio. You want to look at YouTube. You want to look on social media. You want to see if they're on any podcasts. You're looking at any interviews they might have done, any blog posts that they were in or that they wrote. You want to do a Google News search for them and their company. You just want to build this case file on them. And then what you want to do is you want to identify what I call a rich connection point. And this is the thing. This is just the one source that is going to humanize and anchor your email. And it's going to anchor your email in their world, not yours. And this is the problem of the sales email that I got that you all critiqued, is that it was all about their world and not about mine. So how do you get in their world? Well, like I say, you look in all these different areas. And if we were to break the areas down, we might think about, what in their work world, that would probably be the best place to start. What in the work world could you connect with? What might they find interesting that they're talking about, and you can show them that you're interested in that as well. Maybe even geography or education. So, you connect with them on some sort of like, hey, I see that you are from similar areas, or, my partner, my colleague grew up in that same area, or something, something around education. And also it could be hobbies or interests. And I don't think all rich connection points are equal. That I think that work ones are probably prioritized, but sometimes you can't find anything. So you just need something, but you need to do it authentically, right? So here's some examples. And these are what the examples would look like in the actual email. So I'm just going to kind of highlight the examples. So you might say to someone, I saw your post last month on LinkedIn about the challenges facing multinational businesses working remotely, and I found it really interesting. Someone writes like something like that to you, you go, you're flattered. Oh, you read my post. You not only read it, but you found it interesting, and you can point out particular spots. Maybe your rich connection point revolves around their company. I read yesterday in the Wall Street Journal that your company has a new R&D lab in Nigeria for AI. And I know that your background's in machine learning. Maybe you're playing a big role in the lab. And, maybe that's not the case, but the person's flattered. Oh, wow, you're linking my company to my work. That's really interesting. Maybe there's something just even too about shared geography. And all places have different kinds of, emphases or different like special qualities to them. So who knows, maybe someone might say, I noticed in your company bio, you wrote fondly about your childhood in Budapest. Well, I spent a few amazing summers in Budapest with family. And, that for some of you, that might sound hokey, but for others, they might say, well, at least this person's trying, and that seems like, it's not cheesy. It's an authentic connection. And then maybe this is perhaps for fewer people, but you're funny and you say, look, And this is a soccer-centric RCP, or football around the world. But maybe someone says, I'm a big Manchester United fan. Manchester United, the football team, say, I saw that you're a huge fan of Manchester United and there's a huge rivalry. So, and as a Man City fan, they're big rivals. I was initially reluctant to want to work with you in any capacity, right? And now this is how soccer fans or football fans joke with each other. And now what you've done is what I call, you've collapsed the distance between you and this person, you and the reader. This is the challenge. You don't know this person. So how can you quickly collapse that difference between you and them? And you've established a commonality where there prior did not exist. And I'd argue this is how you form the building blocks of a relationship, not with a neutral cold email, but with a warm, personalized email. Step 2, you've got to write an amazing subject line. And so there's 4 ways to do this. One is, and there will be people who disagree about this, and that's totally fine, but this is my own view. You need to make a request in the subject line in the form of a question. So even the subject line is activating them, is actually asking something of them. This subject line also preps them for what you're going to ask them in the email, so that they have a sense going in what you're talking about. You're going to personalize this question too. You're going to make it as tailored to them as possible, as part of their world as possible. And importantly, doing this creates a curiosity, like, whoa, you want people to read it and go, oh, I need to find out what's going on here. Okay. So what are some examples? I see Jorg makes a really good point. Too rich equals stalking, and I totally agree. This is why you have to be, you just have to be really careful about this. And I think generally, if you find a rich connection point, you also want to tell people where you found it, right? So, I don't think you want to look on someone's Instagram and then see an old photo of them playing tennis and then say, oh, I saw that you love tennis. So that's a really good point. Here's a subject line. Again, this is how I view it. And I think that this is the way to it might not be perfect, but it'll get people activated, get your reader curious. So let's say, you might say, Chris, are you free to discuss your interesting July LinkedIn article? I'm going to assume that Chris's July LinkedIn article is important to him. And I'm going to assume that you telling him it's interesting in the subject line will activate him. We'll go, this is interesting. The next one, the subject line is, Sarah, do you have any time to talk about your AI insights in the new lab in Nigeria? Again, this is their name, right? So that's different. If you, I took a scan through all of my email boxes, and I rarely see my name. And some people don't think, there's some data that suggests this is a neutral feature, that if you include someone's name in a subject line, it might or might not work. But I like it, but maybe you don't do it all the time. It's sort of your call. So, and then the last one, Tim, would you be willing to talk to a Man City fan about your company's customer experience? And then a joke, and about Man U's recent struggles. So these are examples of subject lines that what I think is interesting is, you are almost trying to wrap up your entire your cold email to them in the subject line to a certain degree, right? So if you aspire to do that, but you fall short, you're still going to get them interested. And Paul, I see your question, and we will get to that one in the Q&A. So now we've got our subject line. We need to look at the body of the email. And this is what I call you, me, we. And hopefully all of you can remember this. I feel like it's relatively catchy and easy to remember, but it's just simple. And if you use this template in all of your cold sale emails, I think this is a way of just writing more efficiently. I just need to do you, me, we in the body, you, me, we. So what do I mean by you? This is you're writing to you, the client, the reader. So your subject line has gotten them to open. Now they're wondering what this email is about. This is where you're gonna go deeper into the rich connection point, make them more curious and want them to continue to read more. So you're gonna talk about them and the rich connection point. Then you're going to talk about you in the next paragraph. I think I see a lot of emails that start with, hi AJ, I'm a such and such and such. And I think I think that's too slow. I think you want to start with right away, start talking about them, something they're interested in. So second paragraph is me. They're now going to wonder, who is this person? And you have to write about this in a way that's interesting to them. So you want to say, I do this and here's what I'm interested in, or here's how I work, whatever it may be. And I'm going to give you some examples in a second. The last thing that you need to say is the we, which is, now, how do we fit together? So you, me, we. And so this is where you say, they're now wondering, what's the big deal? Okay, he's talked about me, he's talked about himself. Now, what does this mean for us? And this is a subject matter specific issue that all of you as salespeople will have to figure out. Is like, I think this is where you say, you have this problem, here's how we can solve it. That's my view about the we section. This is that connection, that transaction. Okay, so here's an example using the one from previously. Here's the you. I found your post last month on LinkedIn about the challenges facing SaaS businesses working remotely really interesting. And I particularly liked your analysis of how project management tools must adapt to the new normal. You've quoted their article. I think the reader is flattered. Wow, you really read closely. I worked super hard on that article. It's gratifying to hear that someone read it so closely because I worked so hard on it. Now the me, I'm a senior project manager at Vector, a software development firm that helps firms like yours integrate project management tools. And then here's a little bit of a tailored thing where we say, our headquarters is just up the road from you in Bristol, by the way. And that's just a little again, so that doesn't feel like a template, just a copy paste section, but also is catered to them a little bit. And then the we, I read your post and realized that Vector has solutions that address many of the issues that you raise. And I think these solutions, here's the value, could create real organizational transformation for your company. Okay, step 4 is a really gracious call to action. Now we need to you've got them. The last final thing is to just get them to respond. And so there's a lot of data that shows people respond really well to gratitude and generosity. So I think you don't want to grovel, right? You don't want to put yourself in a submissive position, but you really want to be empathetic and say, I get you're really busy, or, and again, some of us might feel like, oh, those are just platitudes or those are fake, but I really think they matter. So here it is. But you also you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes. And you want to be very precise. So here's what I think we should do. I'm sure you're really busy, but would you be open to a quick 15-minute phone call next Monday or Tuesday, morning or afternoon, to talk about your article, Vector, and how we might work together? And now all they can act. And so what happens often is people will say, would you like to talk? And the person will say, well, I'd be up for it, but I have to send another email to ask them about their schedule. And are we going to use Calendly, or how are we going to write? So give them a specific thing. And if they can't do it, that's fine. You keep going, but at least cognitively, you're asking very little of them, because all they have to do is say, yes, I can talk with you Monday afternoon. And boom. And, it's a phone call, not a Zoom. Again, it could be Zoom or whatever, but just you're very specific so that they have to do very little work to say yes to this. So this is the whole thing wrapped up. It's about 150 words. It looks really clean. I actually think it could be shorter, right? But I think length, a little bit longer is okay, as long as it's meaningful stuff, and as long as you've got them kind of hooked. You have to edit this though, right? And I always joke with my students about this, is that, and there's lots of ways to think about editing, but typos or just misspellings or other things like that, it's not so much that people think, oh, this person has a typo in there, that they don't know that that's a typo. It's more that it feels like you didn't care. It feels like I just wrote this email and just sort of sent it off very quickly. So there are lots of great AI writing tools that will help improve your writing beyond grammar too. So the ProWritingAid tool, what I think one of the most effective things for me is it'll identify places where I can eliminate words. And so, for example, I have the email in the ProWritingAid tool, and it points out this idea that many of the issues that you raise. And it says, you don't need that. Readability would improve if you remove that. And there are other places where they say that too. And, you do this 5 or 6 times, and the overall flow of the email just starts to feel smoother and just cleaner. And so this is the ways that the ProWritingAid tool can help with that. You must follow up too if you don't hear from them. You'll have your own personal view on this. I'd argue maybe 10 business working days or 8 business working days, whatever it may be. Everyone's going to have their own style, but the data suggests that most successful cold sales email campaigns require a follow-up. I'd argue a follow-up to a personal tailored email is going to be far more effective than a follow-up to a cold one, right? It's just cold following cold. So a lot of us go, all right, I want to follow up, but I don't know what to say. Like, I don't want to just copy and paste my previous one. So I think what you should do, it's my own view, is just hit reply all to the original one and respond and add something new to that, right? Add something of value so that you're not just restating and bothering them in a way, right? Hey, I didn't hear from you. Could you, instead say, you know what? And ideally, it needs to be authentic. Obviously, you can't just make it up. You say, I'm really excited about the idea of working together. And we've recently added a new feature to our software that I think you find fascinating. Again, the call to action: would a brief call late next week work for you? Here we go. So just to recap, so I want to see how I'm doing on timing. Pretty good on timing. These 5 steps. You want to find a rich connection point, something that collapses the distance between you and this person you don't know. You want to personalize that subject line. You want to make it feel like a handwritten letter to them in the subject line, with words that will activate them, with words that say, well, that sounds like my world. I see my name, I see my company's name, I see a LinkedIn article that I just wrote. This is going to activate me. You, me, we, a precise call to action, and then a follow-up. So I have a little interactive kind of experience I want to do with everyone. So I want to see if you can rewrite the subject line of the cold sales email that I sent you. And so this is the original email. This is that flat, neutral subject line that doesn't interest me. It sounds like, in maybe half a second, I can tell that it's spam. And so what I'd like you to do is rewrite this subject line based off of what we've talked about. Here I've put them again. Here's the 4 keys to a great subject line. What I'm going to do, let me see. What I can do is tell you a little bit about me, or what you might see in my LinkedIn. So if you're looking for a rich connection point to put in the subject line. So I teach writing classes to undergrads and MBA students. I have a podcast about critical thinking. I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I love teaching. My PhD is in education. I study how people learn to write. So this is a little bit about me. I live in Los Angeles. I like to surf. So I'm going to give you everyone 3 or 4 minutes, but can you rewrite this subject line to me and put your rewrite in the chat, and we'll see what we're getting from people. And obviously this is a case, and it's, imperfect, but just given what you know about me, how might you rewrite this to get me to actually open the email and put your rewritten subject line in the chat? It's funny, Kristen. Yes, I'm totally flattered that you'd want to talk about the podcast. So if that was your subject line, and Marina, I really like that idea too. Like, I don't know what you're going to say in the email, but I I'm going to open it because I want to know how you're talking about writing and surfing. That's really cool. Yeah, and George, that's a great, like, that just feels warm, right? And that's the Washington Nationals, and then you link that to my teaching. Yeah, and you're aware of how we're all, I mean, at least my university is going online this fall. So we'll just do a couple more minutes of, I'd love to see as many people, what the idea is to try to put into practice, you know, what I'm talking about here. I should say too, you know, the class that I teach is called Writing 340. And I don't think it would, if Vanessa has a good one, would you like to explore these teaching resources? And Vanessa, you could go one step further, and it would be pretty interesting to, in 20 to 30 minutes, you could see what classes I teach at USC. And so even saying, Andrew, would you like to hear about some teaching resources that could, for your 340 writing course? Okay, I'll wait maybe 2 more minutes to see if anyone else wants to, or maybe 1 more minute to see if anybody else wants to take a shot and put a question in, or their new subject line. Okay, so let's move forward. This is what I wrote. So I don't know what, yeah, I like it, Marina. So this is, I wrote a cold sales email to myself, and hopefully I would respond to that email, given that I'd like to think that I know myself better than other people. But and I almost want to write to this person who sent me the cold sales email, just given that I'm a teacher, I think I almost want to write to them and say, if you're willing to take the time, this is the email that I would actually open up from you. And I'll be honest, I don't even think I'm interested in these resources. But if a human connects with me, I feel compelled to connect with them. You know, so at least I talk to it. I give them 15 minutes for sure. So this is what I said. The rich connection point was this person, whoever wrote this email to me, just looked at all the universities that I taught at and said, hey, I see from LinkedIn that you taught writing for quite a while at 7 different places: LMU, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, now at USC. Awesome schools. You know, given that you've been teaching writing for nearly 10 years, I bet you've developed really effective approach that works. And all of this is like, yeah, this is true. So anyways, this is the perfect cold sales email for me. And I almost want to send this out to people, but then obviously I'd be in trouble because I'd be responding to all these cold sales emails. So let's keep moving into the Q&A. And it is 11:36, and I think we have a good amount of time for the Q&A. And so Haley, I think, is gonna.
Yes. Yeah, I'll read through some of the questions. We had a couple come through the chat, and then if you guys don't mind, please use the Q&A tool at the bottom for these. Let me just find the other one that we had. And AJ, I think I can't be on video because you're the host now, but you know what? I'm okay not being on video.
Okay.
So just
Okay,
FYI,
cool.
I'm not doing it on purpose, but now I kind of am. Okay, so Paul asked a question. I think Paul had to pop off, but he can also check this out in the replay. He says, how do you convert the friendship style of conversation to asking for a person's business? Or do you just assume they know what you do and will ask about your work if they're interested?
I think this is a really good question. And I almost want to throw this out. I imagine that some of the participants have their own ideas about this. To me, it begins from the assumption that I want to work with, or I want to give my money to people that I'd like to have a good relationship with, you know? And so maybe I would, and maybe this isn't answering the question, but like, I think it's not so much about, I wouldn't think about it in terms of you're either a friend or you're in business, but what about this idea of just how do we make connections with people? And so we make connections with people when we are empathize with them, when we try to understand them. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily their friends, but we're just trying to connect with them. And a lot of good advice about cold sales emails is that you need to sound conversational. You need to write as if you speak. I think the bad sales email, cold sales email that I got doesn't sound like a person, speaking. So yeah, I don't know if that answers Paul's question well, but that's how I view it. It's just rather than think of how can I kind of be friendly with this person, it's more like how can I connect with them? How can I listen? How can I show them that I'm listening and I'm just trying to understand who they are?
Awesome. Okay, so Tlam asks, curious, how do the rules change, if at all, for executive assistants who may screen emails for their boss?
That's Tlam, I think what you're asking is, what if my cold sales email goes to an executive assistant and not directly to the boss? This is a good question. I'm not actually familiar with this scenario, but if I had to hypothesize, my hypothesis would be that the assistant would be drawn to this email even if they're not the intended recipient. So all of us have developed, as a result of getting and sending thousands of emails, all of us have developed a spam filter in our brain, and we look at an email, our inbox, and we know really quickly what is and is not spam, I think. So I think the administrative assistant would find I don't know, I'd like to think that they'd be inclined to pass along to their boss a personalized email. So that's my view.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I feel like the goal of an executive assistant is to find content, to pass on what their boss would be interested in. So they should be, pretty intimately familiar with their boss and what they like and what they do and don't do. So they're kind of reading it as, would my boss want to read this? Not would I want to read it too. So,
right.
They're thinking about their boss at the end of the day. And so I feel like that would also help them, all of these principles would help there as well, because the executive assistant, again, is thinking, okay, is this something that my boss would want to see? And so if you've created that connection, hopefully it would get through that filter as well. Okay, a couple questions from Vivek. The first one, what do you do if you're not able to find that personal connection, if it's not available or can't be found?
It's a great question. And this is the issue, is that you are not going to be able to always easily find, a rich personal question. An RPC. And this is why I have the example of the company. So sometimes you don't need to actually talk specifically to that person, but in talking about their company and what their company is up to, you are also activating their interests. And so this is how, if there's no, way to find some sort of connection with that person, you go to the company or even to the industry, to say something sharp and insightful about their industry. So if, for example, they are in, the music industry, for example, is going through a lot of change and a lot of evolution. And so you might say, if they work at Warner Brothers, you could say something like, hi, Chris, I know you're a VP at Warner Brothers, and I'm sure that you kind of have front row seats to all the evolutions that are going on in the music industry. So again, maybe not as rich or as specific, but it's I think that's a way to get around not having any other information.
Great. Okay, a couple more coming through. So Alex asks, I'm not a native speaker. How much do I need to smooth up the idiosyncrasies that crop in because English is my second language?
Alex, it's a great question. My wife is, it sounds like you might be French. My wife is French Canadian. French is her first language, and this is something that I dealt with, that she and I talk about a lot. Two things. I think that people will handle and be totally fine with what I would call like a kind of, we call it in writing studies, a sort of like accented email. That there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's personalized, So I wouldn't be afraid. I wouldn't let the fact that you're writing in a second language get in the way of you writing confidently. And there will likely be qualities of your writing that are accented. There can be a concern if that colloquial language that you're missing gets in the way of clarity. But if you just write simply and clearly, I think that's one way to address that is just go for it, but just try to write as simply and clearly as possible. But if it's personal, I don't think people will have a problem with it. The second thing, and this isn't always possible, but if it's a high stakes email that you're sending, that, if this is someone that you really want to talk to, and that, this is someone you really want to connect with, you just have to have a native speaker read it. Just say, have a friend who you just say, hey, my wife kind of did this. She would email me at work all the time and say, hey, I have this important email to send. Can you take a quick read of it? And she's French speaking. So a lot of it was me just adding an S to things or removing or adding an article, like a to or the. So great question. Not simple either.
Okay, George asks, what are your thoughts on starting with a LinkedIn message? Shorter, but same style of you, me, we?
Yeah, great question, George. And LinkedIn is a different medium in a sense. I do think you, me, we still works. And I think LinkedIn actually is even better than a cold email because, well, one, this is also about, are you connected to them or not? And so, on LinkedIn, if you are connected and you have mutual connections, to me, that's the RCP, right? Like, you just go for it right there and say, hey, we have mutual friends. That I think is a great starting point. If you don't have any mutual friends and you're not connected to them, I think the same you, me, we, the same 5 steps hold for the LinkedIn message. Yeah, Michaelo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has really good advice. And Laura Lee, sorry, Haley, I'm just jumping in because she has such a good point. I would be concerned if someone wrote me and commented on my quilting hobby. You're totally right. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine is a professor at the University of Maine, and in his LinkedIn bio, he says he's a big Bruce Springsteen fan. That means that if anybody writes to him and talks about Bruce Springsteen, I think that's fair game. So yes, if they somehow know that you have a quilting hobby and it's not, you haven't made that clear, then I agree with you. I too would be concerned. So you're totally right. Yeah. Oh, Michael. Thanks for the correction.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so Vivek's second question was, the personal connection may or may not work in all countries and cultures. Is there another way to connect with people?
I think this is a good point, and I wonder if, Vivek, you're bringing, like, I'm from the United States, and let's say I'm trying to connect with someone in Japan, for example. Well, I might not have any, I might have some concerns about how do I connect with someone, from Japan, from a different culture. And this is where I think that what I would emphasize is going to the company level or the industry level. And scanning their work background and identifying some kind of insight, like some kind of analysis of, so if I were writing you, Vivek, if I looked on your LinkedIn, I might see that you've worked in lots of different areas in marketing or sales or whatever it may be. And then I just try to come up with some interesting, compelling insight. Like, it looks like you've worked at, you've done marketing at lots of different companies. I'm sure, you've learned a lot about marketing different kinds of products, given that you were at Pepsi and at, Facebook or something like that. So the art of that is really, I'd argue that identifying the connection point at the company or industry level is a universal approach to connecting with people. If you're not able to say, something more, culturally specific about where they're from, or a kind of a cultural touch point, which admittedly it can be delicate. You're right.
Okay, so Mark has a question about cold calling a company, but I think it can apply for cold emailing as well. What do you do if you don't know a specific person? So if you're just writing to a generic, address.
I wouldn't. This is a great question, Mark. And I think the real challenge here is an individual at a company is going to be the one that creates some advocacy for you or gets you some action. So this can be really tough. You have to be a total investigator. So you have to go to their website. You got to get a specific individual. And obviously you want that individual, you know, if you're trying to, if it's a VC and, you know, you want to connect with them about a startup you're doing or something, you have to find, ideally, you have to find the person who is as close to being the decision maker of those kinds of things as possible. So to me, this is when an hour or a day or a week of research, while it might sound exhausting, when it does pay off, it pays off big. And so I think what I would do is I would just suggest that you exhaust all of your searches just to find someone, an email somewhere. Good question.
Awesome. Those were all, here's, Mark just says the LinkedIn discussion answered a lot. Thanks.
Great, Mark.
Those are all the questions that we have, but we do have a few more minutes. So if anyone has any extra questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat.
And the final thing that I'd say too, please go ahead and drop any questions in the chat, is that this is the first Q&A that we're doing. We are going to do it every month, and we're really interested in any feedback you might have. If there are any other topics that you'd be interested in doing, I'm really open to that, or even changing up the format a little bit, maybe starting with a Q&A. We're really interested in feedback and making these webinars as interesting and as helpful as possible. So. Judy, I think Judy Baker might be discussing, so Mark, your question about how do I find someone at a company, or how do I cold call a company? There are, and I didn't include this, but if you Google, how do I find someone's email address? There are an incredible number of resources for you to find people's email addresses at their job. Sometimes it feels almost a little bit unethical, but there are like lots of different resources where they sometimes you'll try 10 different email formats. So it might be their first name period last name at company.com, might be, but anyways, there's lots of different resources on the internet for sort of guessing people's work emails. So I recommend going to those.
Awesome. All right. Well, a bunch of people have come in and said that this was really interesting and helpful to them. So Thank you guys all for that feedback. Again, Thanks, like Michael. AJ said, yeah, we definitely want to know, what you guys want to hear about, how you want to hear it, all of that type of stuff. So as we wrap up today, so I'm going to drop in the chat a link to our upcoming events, as well as the sign up for our newsletter, our free, and getting a free ProWritingAid account. Because you guys are signed up for this webinar, you'll get to come to all of AJ's sessions every month. So you'll get reminders for each of them, but please do write in. If you have any feedback or suggestions from us, you can just send it to hello@ProWritingAid.com, and we'd love to hear it. So thank you, everybody. And we will talk to you soon.